My stepmother stole my trust fund to pay for her daughter's wedding. Years later, I took it all back. I never imagined that betrayal could come from my own family. But the day I opened that letter from the bank, my entire world shattered. My trust fund, the money my late mother had worked so hard to leave for me, was gone. Every last cent had vanished without my knowledge. And the person behind it, my stepmother, Karen. I gripped the paper in disbelief, my heart pounding. How could this happen? I had never touched that money, saving it for my education and future. Yet here I was, reading in black and white that the account had been drained. I could barely breathe as the truth sank in. Karen had stolen my inheritance to fund an extravagant wedding for her daughter, Lily. My mother's legacy had been reduced to nothing more than a spectacle for people who never cared about me. Looking back, the warning signs had always been there. My father remarried soon after my mother passed, bringing Karen into our lives like a storm. At first, she played the role of a caring stepmother, but it didn't take long for her mask to slip. She favored Lily in every way, treating me like an outsider in my own home. I ignored the whispers, the secretive conversations, the missing documents, until it was too late. When I confronted them, my father refused to meet my eyes, while Karen simply shrugged. It was for a good cause, she said, her lips curling into a satisfied smirk. Lily deserved the perfect wedding. I stood there, speechless. My mother's sacrifice, my future, it meant nothing to them. But if they thought I would walk away in silence, they were wrong. I was going to make them regret ever stealing from me. When I was a little girl, my mother always told me that she was building a future for me, one where I wouldn't have to struggle the way she did. She worked tirelessly, saving every penny she could, ensuring that my education and financial security were taken care of. Even after she passed away, I clung to the promise she left behind. The trust fund she had set up in my name. That money wasn't just financial security. It was my mother's love, her sacrifice, her way of protecting me even when she was gone. But everything changed when my father remarried. Karen entered our lives like a warm breeze, all sweet smiles and soft words. At first, she seemed like the mother figure I had lost. She made me breakfast, bought me small gifts, and told me she would always be there for me. I wanted to believe her. I was desperate to feel like I still had a family. But as time passed, the warmth began to fade. She started making small comments, subtle jabs at how I dressed, how I spoke, how I wasn't as graceful as Lily. I shrugged it off, thinking she was just trying to bond with her daughter. But then it became more than just words. Lily was given everything: brand new clothes, expensive gadgets, trips with her friends. Meanwhile, my father, once attentive and kind, started forgetting my school events, my birthdays, even the little traditions my mother and I used to share. Slowly, I began to feel like a guest in my own home, an afterthought. I remember the first time I truly realized something was wrong. I had just turned 17 and needed some documents for a scholarship application. When I searched through the family filing cabinet, I found something odd. My trust fund documents were missing. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking my father must have moved them somewhere safe. But deep down, an unease settled in my chest. Then, small things started disappearing. My mother's jewelry, the old watch she always wore, even the framed picture of us from my childhood. Every time I asked, Karen had an excuse. Oh, I must have put it away for safekeeping. Or Lily accidentally knocked it over and it broke. But the biggest red flag came when I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. It was late at night, and I was coming down the stairs when I heard Karen whispering urgently to my father, We need more, David. The venue alone is costing double what we expected. I don't know, Karen. Maybe we should cut back a little. No, Lily deserves this. She's only getting married once, and we can't embarrass her with a cheap wedding. Besides, you said yourself, it's just sitting there. She won't even notice. My stomach twisted. Just sitting where? What wouldn't I notice? I wanted to confront them right then and there, but fear held me back. I didn't have proof. What if I was wrong? I told myself I was overreacting, that my father would never allow anyone to take what was mine, that Karen, no matter how much she favored Lily, wouldn't actually steal from me. But a part of me knew the truth. And I was right. A month later, when I went to check my trust fund before starting college applications, my worst fears were confirmed. The balance was empty. Not reduced, not partially used, empty. I stared at the screen, willing it to be a mistake, refreshing the page over and over, but the numbers didn't change. The money was gone. Every last cent my mother had left for me had vanished without a trace. Dread settled in my stomach as I stormed into the living room, my hands shaking. My father and Karen were sitting on the couch, discussing wedding decorations. I didn't bother with pleasantries. Where is my money? My voice was sharp, trembling with rage. They both turned to look at me, my father's face immediately twisting with guilt, while Karen just sighed, setting her wine glass down. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, with that sickeningly sweet tone. "I know this is a lot to take in, but we had no choice." "No choice," I repeated, my voice rising. "That money wasn't yours to touch." Karen simply shrugged. "You wouldn't have needed it anytime soon, and Lily's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. You should be happy for her." Happy? She expected me to be happy that she had stolen my future to throw a party. I turned to my father, searching his face for some kind of remorse, some kind of explanation, but he only looked away. "Karen said it was for the family," he mumbled, as if that excused everything. Something inside me snapped. "You had no right." My voice was dangerously low, the rage bubbling under my skin. "That was my mother's money, my future." Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. We'll pay you back eventually. It's just money." Just money. The words rang in my ears, drowning out everything else. My mother had worked herself to the bone to secure that trust fund. She had sacrificed, gone without, just so I wouldn't have to struggle. And now, because of Karen's greed, because of my father's spinelessness, it was gone. But if they thought I was going to let this go, they were dead wrong. That night, I packed my bags and left. I refused to stay under the same roof as the people who had betrayed me. I had nothing, no savings, no financial support, nowhere to go, but I refused to let them see me break. I took on multiple jobs, working late into the night, barely sleeping, scraping by with whatever I could earn. I lived in tiny apartments, surviving off cheap meals and sheer determination. But I didn't just work. I studied. I learned everything I could about business, finance, and law. I spent every spare moment understanding legal loopholes, fraud cases, and financial recoveries. I was going to get my money back, and when the perfect opportunity presented itself, I knew exactly how to strike. Years passed, but the bitterness never faded. I worked tirelessly, fueled by the injustice of what had been stolen from me. Every night, as exhaustion pulled at my body, I reminded myself of the betrayal, the way Karen had smirked, the way my father had looked away, the way they had dismissed my mother's sacrifice, like it was nothing. But I was no longer the naive girl they had manipulated. I had learned. While juggling jobs, I had earned my degree in business and finance. I had studied fraud cases, learned about asset recovery, and understood the power of leverage. And then, the opportunity I had been waiting for arrived. One evening, while scrolling through an old social media account, I saw a post that made my blood run cold. It was from Karen, boasting about Lily's upcoming vow renewal. 5 years of marriage calls for something spectacular. We're making this even bigger than the wedding. Can't wait to celebrate with everyone. Bigger than the wedding, which meant bigger expenses. I dug deeper. Through mutual connections, I found out that Karen and my father had taken out multiple loans over the years. Their lifestyle, the designer clothes, the fancy parties, the luxurious vacations, hadn't been sustainable, and now they were drowning in debt. That was when I knew. I wasn't just going to take back what was mine. I was going to make them pay. I spent weeks carefully laying my groundwork. First, I reached out to an old family friend, someone who had once been close to my mother. They worked in legal consulting and had connections in the financial sector. After explaining my situation, they helped me track down details about my stolen trust fund. Through bank statements and transaction histories, we uncovered the full picture. Karen had drained the fund through unauthorized withdrawals, and my father had co-signed it all. Legally, it was fraud, but pressing charges wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel the betrayal, so I set a trap. Using a newly created identity, I reached out to Karen as a potential investor for her new business venture. She had been trying to launch a boutique but lacked the capital, posing as a wealthy investor looking for expansion opportunities. I expressed interest in funding her boutique, dangling the promise of a large sum of money, more than enough to cover their growing debts. Karen, ever the greedy opportunist, took the bait immediately. Over the course of several weeks, I strung her along, setting up video calls, using a voice modifier and a blurred camera, and discussing contracts. She was eager, practically begging me to close the deal. I told her there was just one condition. She had to show full financial transparency, meaning she had to provide all her business accounts, outstanding loans, and even past transactions to prove credibility. She didn't hesitate. She wanted the money too badly, and just like that, she handed over everything I needed. With the documents in hand, I made my move. First, I anonymously submitted a report to the bank, detailing the unauthorized transactions from my trust fund. I provided every piece of evidence, bank statements, timestamps, and even a recording of Karen admitting she had used money that wasn't technically hers. The investigation was swift. The bank froze their accounts. Next, I forwarded the same evidence to a lawyer who filed an official fraud complaint against Karen and my father. Since my name had been on the trust fund and I had never authorized the withdrawals, they were liable for every cent they had stolen. But I wasn't done yet. The final blow came on the day of Lily's extravagant vow renewal. Karen had spared no expense, renting out a luxury venue, hiring the best caterers, even commissioning a custom designer gown for Lily. Guests arrived, dressed to the nines, expecting a night of glamour and celebration. And that was when everything unraveled. Right as the ceremony was about to begin, bank officials arrived. They pulled Karen and my father aside, informing them of the fraud charges. Their accounts were frozen. Their debts had come due. They had no way to pay for the venue, the vendors, or any of the lavish expenses. Everything came crashing down in front of their high society friends. Karen's face drained of color as she frantically tried to talk her way out of it. But the officials weren't interested in excuses. The venue manager, realizing they wouldn't be getting paid, promptly shut everything down. The caterers packed up the food. The decorators dismantled their work. The guests, confused and murmuring, began to leave. Lily, humiliated beyond words, screamed at Karen in front of everyone. And my father, for the first time, he looked at me, really looked at me. I stood at the back of the room, watching it all unfold, a satisfied calm settling over me. He opened his mouth as if to say something, maybe to apologize, maybe to beg, but I shook my head. It was too late. The people who had stolen from me, who had dismissed my pain as an inconvenience, were finally facing the consequences of their greed. And I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth had done all the work for me. Karen's carefully constructed world had shattered in a matter of minutes. The woman who had once gloated about stealing my inheritance now stood in the middle of the ruined venue, eyes darting wildly, as if searching for a way out of the disaster. My father, usually so composed, looked small, his hands trembling at his sides. The murmurs of the guests turned into whispers, then outright laughter. The high society crowd that Karen had worked so hard to impress was now watching her downfall with amusement and thinly veiled contempt. But I wasn't done yet. I stepped forward. Karen's gaze locked onto mine, and for a second, I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. A silent, unspoken understanding passed between us. She knew. She knew I had done this. You! Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was sharp with disbelief. It was you. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. I'm sorry, Karen. Are you having financial troubles? Her nostrils flared. You think this is funny? She took a step toward me, shaking with rage. You set me up. You ruined us. I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. No, Karen. You ruined yourself. Lily, still humiliated from the public spectacle, turned on her mother. What is she talking about? Karen ignored her daughter, her manicured nails curling into fists. I raised you. I gave you everything. I let my gaze turn cold. You stole everything. My father, still reeling, finally found his voice. Please, he murmured, stepping forward. We can fix this. You don't have to do this. I stared at him, feeling a strange sense of detachment. This was the man who had once held my tiny hands as a child, who had promised to always take care of me. And yet, when Karen had decided I was disposable, he had stood by and let it happen. There was no fixing this. I pulled a folded paper from my bag and held it out. This is a legal notice. You have 30 days to repay every cent you stole from me. If you don't, the fraud charges will proceed, and you'll both be facing prison time. Karen's face twisted in pure hatred. You're bluffing. I smiled. Try me. Lily, still watching in horror, let out a small broken laugh. Oh my God. She turned to her parents, eyes wide. Is this true? Did you really steal from her? Karen didn't respond, but my father did. We didn't have a choice, he said, his voice raw. The money was just sitting there. We thought we could pay it back before she ever found out. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. I was your family, Dad, and you still chose her over me. His shoulders sagged in defeat. The weight of everything crashed over Karen at once. She turned to the venue manager, her voice sharp and desperate. We'll figure this out. Just give us some time. The manager didn't even let her finish. Your payment has bounced. You need to vacate the premises immediately. Security stepped forward. Karen let out a furious scream. You can't do this to me. I made this family what it is. Lily backed away from her mother in disgust. You made us a joke. And just like that, the final piece crumbled. Karen turned to my father, searching for support, but he couldn't even look at her. She was alone, the woman who had stolen my future, my security, my mother's sacrifice. She had finally lost everything. And for the first time in years, I felt light. I turned on my heel, walking away as Karen collapsed onto the ground, sobbing. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. And I had finally taken back what was mine. The dust had settled, but the echoes of the confrontation lingered in my mind for weeks. I had won. Not just my money back, but my dignity, my justice. Karen and my father were left with nothing. Their once flawless reputation in tatters. But even with my victory, I couldn't shake the heaviness in my heart. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, of watching Karen and my father reap what they had sown. I imagined the satisfaction of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. And yet, standing amidst the ruins of their downfall, I felt something unexpected. Emptiness. It wasn't regret. No, I didn't regret exposing their betrayal or taking back what was stolen from me. But I realized that revenge, while satisfying in the moment, didn't erase the years of pain. The nights I spent feeling abandoned and unwanted. It didn't bring back my mother or undo the hurt my father had inflicted by choosing Karen over me. In the weeks following their collapse, I focused on rebuilding my life. With the money restored to me, I moved into a place of my own, something I had longed for since I was forced out of my childhood home. It was nothing extravagant, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every photo on the wall was a reflection of me, not the remnants of a family that had betrayed me. I found solace in the friendships I had built over the years, people who had stood by me, even when I had nothing. I reconnected with old friends, people who reminded me of the girl I used to be before the world turned cold. Slowly, I started to heal. As for Karen, she tried to cling to what little dignity she had left. But the scandal had ruined her social standing. The people who once fawned over her quickly distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with a woman who had stolen from her own stepdaughter. The last I heard, she and my father had moved to a smaller town, trying to escape the shame. Lily, on the other hand, surprised me. She reached out a few weeks after the disaster, not with anger, but with understanding. I didn't know, she admitted one evening over coffee. I was blind to everything she did, but looking back, the signs were always there. For the first time in years, I saw her not as my enemy, but as someone who had been manipulated just as I had. She had been raised by Karen, molded into her image, and only now was she realizing the damage that had been done. I don't expect forgiveness, she said, but I am sorry. I considered her words. I had spent so long holding on to my anger, believing that letting go would mean letting them win. But sitting across from Lily, I realized that wasn't true. I had already won. Holding on to hatred wouldn't change the past, but it could poison my future. So I forgave, not for them, but for me. That was the final step in taking back what Karen had stolen, my peace. As the seasons changed, so did I. I built something for myself, something no one could take away, and while the scars of betrayal would always remain, they no longer defined me. In the end, I learned that true justice isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your life and moving forward, stronger than before. And that was the sweetest revenge of all.